Our gospel today is taken out of the Gospel of Luke, chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. Listen to how God will speak to you through this third scripture today. He entered Jericho and was passing through it, and a man was there named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector and was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not see because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see Jesus, because he was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he hurried down and was happy to welcome him. And all who saw it began to grumble, and they said, "He has gone to be with a guest of one who is a sinner." Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Lord, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much." Then Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost." Please be seated. Let us pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts and minds be acceptable to you, O God, who is our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Zacchaeus was a wee little man was he. Some of you remember that song from childhood Sunday school, even though our kids today didn't. Maybe you even sang it. Well, I will spare you singing the rest of that song, but what I can't spare you is the fact that some of us, at some point, we've been Zacchaeus. Just a wee little man or a wee little woman. Regardless of how tall we are, at some point in our lives, we've known what it's like to be short in stature. We've all been Zacchaeus. To be short in stature is not about our physical height. To be short in stature can be seen as a spiritual condition that affects all of us, people of all ages and all shapes and all sizes. To be short in stature is part of the human condition, and it is one of the threads that run through this morning's lectionary readings. In today's Old Testament reading, Habakkuk must have been feeling short in stature when he cried out, "O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, but you will not listen? Or cry to you violence and see violence, and you will not save?" Habakkuk surely must have felt short in stature as he witnessed destruction and violence and justice that never seemed to prevail, and judgments that were perverted. As we will remember, Habakkuk is a compilation of the prophet's laments. Habakkuk is not an accusation against Israel or its sin or its message to the people on God's behalf like some of the other prophetic books in the Bible. Instead, Habakkuk questions God's goodness. Habakkuk questions God's goodness because he sees so much injustice and evil and tragedy in the world. Habakkuk is like, "Hey God, what is going on with our world today? Why is there so much injustice, and why does there seem to be evil? Why is it prevailing? And why, God," says Habakkuk, "is there so much tragedy in the world?" Now, throughout Habakkuk, we see that Babylon is an example of any nation that exalts itself above God and practices injustice and violence and idolatry. And in the end, God reminds Habakkuk in every generation that God and God alone will deal with evil. We, though, instead of dwelling on the evil, we can continue to love and trust God's timing and plan as we remain faithful to God. So Habakkuk's world, though, doesn't seem all that distant or different from ours sometimes. Sometimes we look at our world and chances are There are days when we feel short of stature. Questioning the violence, leadership decisions, direction, we are not alone. And Habakkuk wondered this in the 7th century BC. This wondering sometimes reminds us of the times we've cried out to God, but we ourselves have felt unheard. Then suddenly it happens, and we remember what it's like to be short in stature. Today we also hear the psalmist declare, I am small and of little account. And in today's pericope, Zacchaeus is described as the chief tax collector, a rich man. He was an outcast, like I explained to the children, and he had no standing in the society. He was in cahoots with the Roman occupiers. He preyed on his own people. He preyed on his own people, not prayed for his people, but preyed on them. Who could he take more money from that week? He was looked down upon, and Zacchaeus was despised by all. You may remember last week's gospel in Luke 18 in the sermon, other things pointed out when we talked about, oh, that's his kind. Those are those people. And they were thanking God that they were not as bad off as they were. Zacchaeus was, as Luke says, short of stature. So I wonder, what is your Zacchaeus story? When have you been Zacchaeus? How have you experienced being short of stature? It happens in all sorts of ways, you know. See, if any of this fits and sounds familiar to you, has life ever cut you down to size? Have you ever felt small and insignificant, ignored, and one day unimportant? Have you ever felt as if you don't measure up and that you're not enough? Do you ever feel as if you're sometimes on the outside and not always on the inside? Does it seem as if you've outgrown your past or the opinions of others? Are you constantly trying to prove yourself, not just to others, but to yourself and sometimes to God? And do you ever wonder if Jesus notices you? Or do you do like Zacchaeus and climb a tree and say, I'm here, Jesus, really, I'm here. You may not be able to see me, but I'm here. Do you ever feel invisible or powerless? Do the circumstances of your life sometimes overwhelm you? Does it seem as if your value and your worth and your dignity have been defined by your past actions and choices, what you have done and by what you have left undone? We've all experienced loss, and sometimes we feel like we're anonymous in the big crowd of life. Have you ever felt as if you weren't up to what life was asking of you? If you answered yes to any of these questions, you probably know what it's like to feel like Zacchaeus. You know what it's like to put yourself in his shoes. I had a counselor one day say to me, every time I feel small or invisible, I just want to run away and escape my life. She wanted to jump out of her life and jump into someone else's life because she didn't like the one that God had given to her. But as we know, we can't jump out of our own life. We can't. It's our lives, and it's the only life that we've been given. So if Jesus is going to do anything new with me, you might ask yourself, it has to start with my life as it is. To run away from, ignore, or try to escape my life is denying that Jesus can work with us, no matter who we are. Jesus worked with Zacchaeus. Jesus invited Zacchaeus to his house. That's what Zacchaeus does in our gospel today. Zacchaeus refuses to be lost in the crowd. He refuses to hide. He refuses to run away from who he is. Instead, he runs ahead. He runs ahead of the crowd and he climbs the tree. Everyone could see what he was doing, and they were probably, oh man, Zacchaeus is getting up in the tree. We don't even want him here. Luke says he did that so that he could see Jesus. But here's what I wonder. What if he climbed the tree because he wanted to be seen by Jesus? What if that was how he faced the truth and reality of his own life? What if he wasn't just climbing a tree, but was climbing the cross of being short of stature? What if Zacchaeus was offering all that he was and all that he had in the way that he knew how to Jesus? What if that was Zacchaeus crying out, "Here I am, Lord. This is my life. Look at me. Claim and recognize me too as a son of Abraham." And that's exactly what Jesus did. He stopped and he looked up to Zacchaeus. And I can't help but wonder if that might not have been the first time anyone actually had ever looked up to Zacchaeus, being that he was small. Jesus looked up to him with love, and Jesus looked up to him with acceptance, and Jesus looked up and invited him into his home, treated him like a son of Abraham. Jesus saw more than just the fact that he was a chief tax collector, that he was a rich man, a man short in stature. He saw that Zacchaeus couldn't see for himself. He couldn't see the whole picture. Friends, Jesus has the whole picture. We only have partial view. We have partial view, but Jesus sees the whole thing. In the eyes of the crowd, Zacchaeus is a sinner. In his own eyes, he's a wee little man, short of stature. But in the eyes of Jesus, Zacchaeus is the son of Abraham. Zacchaeus was sought, seen, and saved. The lost one has been found. That's what I want when I'm short of stature. I want to see Jesus, but more than that, I want to be seen by Jesus. Even when I don't like or can't accept what I see in myself. I want to know that Jesus sees more than I can see in myself. I want to be recognized and called by name by the God who created me. I want to be reminded that I am more than what I've become. That God can do more with me than I can even see or envision today. I want to know that despite what has become of my life in the places where we are not proud, I am too a child of Abraham. I want Jesus to call me out of my tree, off my cross of being short and having issues, and into a new life, because God can do that for us. God can take us in places that we don't expect. To be seen and heard is exactly what Zacchaeus wanted. Well, let me tell you, this is our day, because that's the promise today's pericope and gospel holds for each one of us. Whatever it is that has made you and I short of stature, whatever has run us up a tree, that's the place where Jesus stops and looks up with love and acceptance and calls us back down into a new life, into a life where we're changed. Let's not turn away from that place. Let's explore it. Let's not turn away from the face of Christ. It's so easy to hear the name Zacchaeus and think only of a wee little man that climbed up a sycamore tree. It's easy to hear his name and think that, and to see the ways we've become short in stature, but that's only part of the truth. Do you know what the name Zacchaeus means? It means pure, clean, innocent. That's the greater truth. That's what Jesus saw in Zacchaeus. Yes, he was a chief tax collector. Yes, he certainly wasn't perfect. Yes, he cheated people out of money and used it for himself. He was all that. And he was pure and clean and innocent. It's what he sees in you and me, even when we don't see it in ourselves. It's what Jesus sees in us that matters. Jesus looks up and calls us back to our truest selves. Zacchaeus says to us, I'm coming, Lord. I'm coming down the tree. I'll sit with you. And I'm curious, and I wonder if he's thinking, oh, man, Jesus doesn't know who he's getting. He's getting someone really flawed. But Jesus says to Zacchaeus and says to us, you come here right now. That's not who you are. That's not your place. You come down, for I'm going to your house today. Jesus says, I'm going to your house today. Jesus is going to go to the house of Zacchaeus. The tax collector Zacchaeus was despised, rejected, yet he's eating with the master at the house. So whose house will we eat at today? Who will we invite in? Who will we see and who will we hear? Who will we take time to be around? Who will we invite during this stewardship month? Who will we invite to church? How will we give of ourselves, our time, our talents, our treasure? What does God ask of us? What does God want from us? God calls us to see people, to hear people, to hear their stories. God calls us to be there as men and women of faith. So let's do that this stewardship season. Let's do that. Amen.